Hey guys, how's it going? It's Al. NBA DFS season is here, and I've got a guest, Mike Leone from EstablishTheRun.com, is going to talk to us about the five most asked questions. I put this out on Twitter to try and get an idea of what people wanted to know about daily fantasy NBA. People that hadn't played before, people that were somewhat new, people who wanted a refresher or just want an idea from players who have been around the game, producing content, playing the game at a high level for a long time, how they approach things. We had Peter Jennings on from Fantasy Labs on a couple of other videos in this How to Win on NBA playlist, and we're going to record a couple videos with Mike Leone, and this is the first one. So we're going to get to 5 questions that you guys wanted to know about. I'll bring him in just a second. NBA is a completely different animal from NFL. So if you are a new daily fantasy NFL player in 2020 and you're just transitioning into being an NBA player, there's some very massive differences that you're going to have to make yourself aware of. It's a completely different animal. Anytime you play a different game or a different sport in DFS, you have to bring a different skill set to the floor. So we're going to get at all those different things. Thank you guys for being here. Drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, make sure that you ring that notifications bell so that you get a notification anytime I publish new content. There will also be NBA content Monday through Friday right here on this main channel as well this season, a first look and a slate breakdown, all in one video for every Monday through Friday slate. So I'm really excited about the NBA content this year. And also jump in the Discord as well. You'll always have people to talk about daily fantasy, whatever sport with. There's a link right down below in the description, and there'll be a pinned comment down below to take you over to Establish the Run where Mike's stuff is. So let me bring in Mike Leone, long-term director of analytics over at Establish the Run, long-term friend of mine in daily fantasy. When was the first time we met? The Star Street final for baseball?
I think that might have been the first time we met in person. It probably was, because that was the first big really DFS event I attended out of any of them, because I hadn't made it to some of the conferences before that.
Yeah, and you're having yourself a big year. Big Buffalo fan, Buffalo guy, putting you in a good mood.
Yeah, it's been a fun NFL season, both DFS wise and Buffalo Bills wise.
Yeah, you've had an amazing NFL season. Congratulations on all your success this year. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find your content this season?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at 2hats1mike. You can follow me over at Establish the Run. Me and Drew Dinkmeyer do a GPP show every Saturday called Establish a Million, where I dive into small field stuff in particular. Drew handles a lot of the MME large field type stuff, and we'll be doing basketball as well. And I do want to plug the podcast I do with Pat Crane, Establish the Edge. That's a free podcast once a week, and we've had a lot of fun with that. Covering everything from DFS to dynasty, redraft, best ball. We cover it all, and we try and really get in depth with strategy. So that's really fun. Pat's a really smart guy, so it's fun to get deep into the weeds on those things.
Outstanding. Glad that you're here with us, because we have 5 questions from people that I've cultivated over the weeks in anticipation of your arrival here on the stream. And the first question that I think is an extremely important one, because anybody who's watched anybody's content, I'm not even saying just my content, ETR's content, anybody who's watched any content for daily fantasy NFL, when DraftKings has done a fantastic job of bringing new players into the industry this year, the first thing that we get to is stacking and correlation when it comes to daily fantasy NFL. But in NBA, does stacking or correlation, or does stacking exist? Let's start there. My answer is no. But correlation does, and maybe you can touch on a few ways that correlation matters and how you can better correlate your lineups for NBA.
Yeah, there's a few different ways. I mean, one, if there's a game with blowout potential, for example, and people are afraid to play Giannis. So you gave this example when we were talking beforehand, but if people are afraid to play Giannis because he's only projected for 28 minutes and they're playing against the New York Knicks, it's a blowout potential game. Well, if you really want to play Giannis and hope he plays more minutes, you might want to take the main guy on the Knicks. And the idea behind that is, if this game's going to stay tight, to give Giannis those extra minutes, someone on the Knicks is going to have to play pretty well. Probably multiple people are going to have to play pretty well. So maybe you take RJ Barrett on the Knicks coming back. I won a GPP like this a couple of years ago, taking Anthony Davis in a blowout risk game against the Knicks, played Tim Hardaway Jr. Both guys kind of volatile, high ceiling guys. They went off in the same game. It stayed close. I was really able to capitalize on that. The other thing I think you can do is game stack a little bit. Now, I wouldn't overthink this. It's not like you make a lineup and it's uncorrelated and you're like, oh, I got to start all over, which in NFL DFS, you might legitimately say, I have to start all over because there's no correlation. NBA, you wouldn't do that, but about 6% of games in NBA do go to overtime. And to have those extra potential minutes correlated by playing guys in the same game makes some sense. If it's a game that already has a high total, that you already like a few guys, maybe you take one guy that you don't like as much, but he's going to be pretty low owned because he doesn't have a great projection, correlate him with the other guys. And if that game goes to overtime, you're printing with the extra minutes. It's not something I do every single night though. Whereas NFL, you do try to do it almost every single slate.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few quarterbacks that you might not do it, but like NBA, you do have certain point guards who have a really high assist rate. You know, the first one that comes to mind for me, or at least most prevalent in my mind, is somebody like Chris Paul this year on Phoenix. If he's going to have a good game where he gets 10, 12, 15 assists, it's probably true that Booker and or Ayton are going to have a good game as well. So building your lineups that are centered around Chris Paul to have at least some exposure, where you say, if you're building in a lineup builder, you could say, okay, if my lineup has Chris Paul, then have exactly one of Ayton or Booker, knowing that Ayton's going to be running pick and roll with him on the wing or the top of the key, or Booker's going to be running off screens and he's going to feed him in the pocket for every single open shot that he gets. I don't know if it's something you need to force all the time or with every point guard on the slate, but there are certain high assist guys that you might want to write a rule for.
Yeah, we saw this a lot with Lob City with Chris Paul and Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan. I think what's key in NBA that's a little different than NFL is, both those guys should project, probably pretty well as values that you like anyways. You're probably not digging real deep, where NFL, you might dig deep on a pass catcher you wouldn't normally play.
Yeah.
NBA, it's probably, you want to correlate within the group of guys that you would play by themselves anyways. But to your point, like the opposite side of that too is, two guys that are really ball dominant, you might want to be careful about playing them together on the same team. Also, bigs sometimes are negatively correlated. One big gets in trouble, the other plays more minutes and vice versa. So you do want to be a little bit careful about how you play those guys together, and you might want to do a negative projection dock if you're using one of the bigs, dock the other 10% or something like that.
Yeah, all that makes sense. Now you brought up a point in there, which is going to lead us to our second question. NBA, you do have to swallow a little bit more percentage than you would in NFL. NFL, like 30% is a really high percent for a player in tournaments. NBA, like 70 is a high percent. 75 is a high percent for a player in tournaments because it's very price sensitive. NBA, there's more times for players to score. There's just more scoring opportunities than baseball, or more scoring opportunities than football. Which leads to this, and I think that this is not totally incorrect when it comes to small field tournaments, which you've become a specialist in this football season, like 100 to 200 man tournaments. But larger field, I think you need to get away from doing this. Should I play my cash game lineup in NBA tournaments?
Yeah, it really is a difficult question. As you said, in large field tournaments, I mean, it's a flat no. It's just unlikely that you're not going to be duped, or even if you're not duped, you're still probably not creating leverage. It's not solely about being unique. It's also about the leverage of all the guys in your lineup. NFL, I wouldn't play a cash game lineup in any tournament. NBA, as you said, when you get into some of these smaller field things, if you think your build's a little bit different than other people, I think you can do it. Because again, you don't have to be overly concerned about the correlation. And because it's a little bit more predictable, you're just going to have to swallow more chalk. I'll have NFL sites where I have everyone under 10%. NBA, you might have teams where everyone's over 10% quite frequently. So I think it's okay. What I like to do is, there's two things I like to do in smaller field tournaments. Maybe make a 2v2 swap off the obvious cash game lineup. And you do have to kind of have some understanding of, is my cash game lineup like going to be like the chalk lineup that a few other people are going to play? Because if it is, you really don't want to be duped even in a small field tournament. That really cuts into your ROI long term. So maybe you do a 2v2 swap that's doesn't project that much worse, but is going to be lower owned. The other thing I like to do in tournaments sometimes, if there's an obvious build, like let's say it's studs and duds one night, there's a couple due to injuries, there's a couple 3K guys on DK that open up, and you're going to build studs and duds. If there's a middle of the pack balanced lineup that projects within a couple of points of studs and duds, I like to play that, where you're not sacrificing a lot of projected points, but you're getting a lot of leverage just because no one's constructing that same way.
I mean, that's a nice segue, Mike. You're a professional. Those broadcasting classes are really paying off. Our next question is lineup construction. Where do you start? Cheap players, studs, or value plays in the mid-range? For me, I personally like to start with focusing in on the one stud play that I really want to build the lineup around. Like there's usually one guy that projects in the best matchup, going to play a ton of minutes, whatever it is. And then I pick 2 or 3 value plays that I think are standing out from a points per dollar point of view. And it's not straight points per dollar, because like some people talk about a multiple. You and Drew years ago created the multiple plus a constant standpoint. I kind of use a value range using both of those, right? I don't just look for the one. I'm like, okay, I need him to get between 45 and 52 points tonight. Like if he falls in there, then that's fine for me. So where do you start your lineup building?
Yeah, probably a few core values where they just kind of tick all the boxes. You know, the playing time is safe. Maybe a teammate's out, so you feel really good about their fantasy points per minute being higher, whether it's a higher usage rate, higher assist rate, higher rebound rate, whatever it is. And then you also tick the matchup box. You know, they're playing up in pace against a defense that struggles against whatever position the guy that you want is. So kind of trying to find those 2 or 3 guys that really tick all the boxes across the board. The final box, of course, being price, which is so important in NBA, and seeing what I can build around that. You know, that's how I'm approaching my cash games. For tournaments, it's a subtle difference, but whatever sport I'm playing, whether it's NFL or NBA, I want to kind of really try and focus on where's my edge tonight. You know, is everyone playing this center that's risky to get into foul trouble? Maybe I'll play a different center value. And that's sort of where my edge is tonight, is the field's overplaying this, or the field's maybe not seeing this, or maybe there's a game that I can stack that, you know, people are going to be really spread out, but I know I can stack this game with a 230 total, a tight spread, and 1 or 2 guys are going to be owned, but 3 or 4 aren't. So really, I know that's a little bit vague, but you really want to think through, you know, where am I creating the most leverage? And then you can be pretty smart after that. In NBA, you can almost fill in an optimal lineup, you know, outside of the 1 or 2 really strong leverage edge spots that you feel like you have on the field.
I think that's pretty strong. It's like you said, I start everything with my cash game build, even if I'm not playing cash games. Because like I've been a tournament only NBA guy when I play NBA. And the last couple of years I haven't, because like this year I will, because after NFL season I'm like spent, I'm burnt, and then baseball season starts with my kids and I'm not at the house at lineups lock, because that's when their practices start. So like I kind of was a tournament only player, and then I couldn't really play very much from February to the end of the season the last couple of years. This year there's no baseball right now because of COVID, so probably gonna end up playing a little bit of NBA DFS, a little bit more than I usually do. So for me, everything starts with a cash game build, because it's the right plays. You mentioned the chalk, and some people look at chalk like it's a bad word. The truth is, the chalk players are the chalk for a reason. Especially in NBA, you have to be extremely price sensitive. NFL, you can say, okay, well, this guy's like 800 more. I'll find it. I'll just play a cheaper defense because I can punt off defense because it's so random. There's way less randomness in NBA. What if I play this guy who's the 8th man on the team, and maybe somebody in front of him will get into foul trouble? It doesn't really happen all that much. You know, you're going to focus on your minutes. You're going to play the right guys in the good matchups who are going to get a lot of rotation time. And the number one correlation from real life to fantasy or DFS is actually getting buckets. So you need guys that score points and contribute in other ways. But finding ways to find those guys leads us to question 4. What, and you kind of touched on it a little bit in the last question, I want you to focus on a little bit more here. What underlying stats and metrics should players or people who are, you know, playing daily fantasy be focusing on?
Well, the first one is the smizzle, minutes equal money. I mean, you got to be on the court to produce. And like you said, there's going to be a lot of opportunities throughout an NBA game. It's not like NFL where, you know, a guy gets tackled at the 1 and it's like, oh, that was your shot. You know, if a guy rims out on a 3, maybe he makes the next one. You know, there's not one play in baseball. You know, a guy hits a 400-foot ball. Does it go over the fence or not? It's like this huge swing on your night. You know, a rimmed out 3 or a block that doesn't get credited, it's not going to make or break your night because you're going to have so many opportunities. But to get those opportunities, you need to be on the floor. So the biggest, the easiest way to think about how good of a play is one, how much are they going to play? And two, what is their fantasy points per minute going to be? And that's usually pretty easy to find. And there are some things that feed into fantasy points per minute that could change on the context, the DVP matchup, right? When I say DVP, how does the defense that player's going up against defend that player's position? At ETR, we try to break down guys into, not only their traditional position, but kind of a cluster of like what type of player they are, a low usage point guard, or maybe they're an alpha, that type of thing. But you can see where fantasy points per minute could change too when teammates are out, or just on recent trends on usage rate. Usage rate's the big one. How often is this player taking shots, commanding the offense? And then assist rate feeds into that as well. If you see spikes in those rates, you can kind of dig in and see, is this real or is this not real? And if you think it's real, that's a signal that the fantasy points per minute could be rising for a player.
Yeah, I think that all that is key. Clearly playing time is number one, right? They got to be on the floor. That's not always correlated with who starts the game, right? So like there's some key players. I was kind of sifting through a few of them while you were going there for a minute. So like guys like Lou Williams, as I said, the number one correlation between real life and fantasy is getting buckets, and he can do that as well as have wings named after him at strip clubs. So he's a multifaceted individual. You got to get guys that are on the floor. Starting doesn't always necessarily equal minutes. You can get a good amount, and again, it's versus the price. So like when you say minutes equals money, well, I just played a bunch of guys that play a bunch of minutes, but like realistically, as you said, it's fantasy points per minute, and that's how players are priced. So when players are out, ahead of them, somebody else is going to fill those minutes. There's 48 minutes to be played at point guard, 48 minutes to be played at all 5 positions on the court. So if somebody who chews up 32 or 36 of those minutes on a night in, night out basis is suddenly out, that creates a vacuum. That's 36 minutes that need to be eaten up. They're not all going to be eaten up by one guy, but somebody who maybe plays 15 minutes and scores 1 fantasy point a minute is priced accordingly. And now all of a sudden, he's probably 3K or 3,500 on DraftKings. And now all of a sudden, he's probably going to play 26 to 32 minutes. Probably won't get that fantasy point per minute, or won't actualize that because he's playing with other high usage players. But they have tools like on-off statistics that you can look at to see what happens when this player's off the floor. How many fantasy points does this guy get? Or when this player's on and this player's off, which gives us a little bit of a better picture with players playing with other groups of players, how they're going to perform, and then you kind of work that in. And those are all baked into the projection set that you guys build over at ETR.
Yeah, absolutely. And another tool, you mentioned there's some spots where you can find off on statistics. Like I think Add More Funds has some, NBA
Fantasy
with or without
Labs has it, Roto Grinders has it.
Yeah. So those are good, but also there's this like, I think Roto Grinders has the rotations as well, but I think there's a site called popcornmachine.net too. And you can kind of see the rotations from the game. You mentioned a guy like Lou Williams, who was the very first guy that popped into my head before you even said him, because he's sort of the poster child.
He's an outlier. Yeah.
But you can see how their rotations work, and if they close games, they play the end of games. And similarly, if you're worried about, a guy's minutes were down the last game, you can kind of check, was this guy in foul trouble? He got yanked in the second quarter because he had picked up his 3rd foul with 5 minutes left, and he probably would have played the whole rest of the second quarter. So that's 5 minutes he got shorter due to foul trouble. And similarly for blowouts, you can kind of see, these guys didn't close because it was a blowout. So there's a little bit of nuance there to help you sift through sort of the noisiness of the recent minutes game log.
That's really cool. I like that. Now, those are the first 4 questions on how to play. The last question is, what should you play? Game selection for beginners or low stakes players. Now, what I've been trying to harp on with my community is, if you're somebody who's watching the videos every single day on my YouTube channel, if you're somebody who shows up to my Twitch stream 4, 5, 6 days a week, and you're in Discord talking about daily fantasy, surrounding yourself, eat, sleep, drinking daily fantasy, and conversing with other people in the community as well, trying to improve every single day, you are already better than 75-80% of the community at low stakes, right? You're doing more than they are to improve. So whether you're going to play low stakes cash games, that's $1, $2, $5 cash games, your ROI should be higher at those than it will at 50, 109, 270. So that's an edge that you can express. I think that you should focus on playing as many different opponents at low stakes head-to-head cash for the amount of time that you can. That means limit to one, right? Don't leave it unlimited. Let people take as many as one of your head-to-heads at every buy-in level. 2, focus on the large field single entry double ups and 50-50s. And again, if you're a low stakes player and want to try and find out if you're good at mass multi-entry, getting a lineup builder like the one over at Fantasy Labs. Again, there's links down below to multiple lineup builders in the description. Just click show more if you wanted to go check them out for NBA season. A lot of them have like a 5-7 day trial if you want to just give them all a different shot and see which one fits your eye the best. There are mini max games, 5 cent, 10 cent, 25 cent, 50 cent, where you're going to get in at a lower buy-in and still have a high bank rate, where if you win, you're going to win enough to really explode your bankroll while still having the safety of those low dollar head-to-head and 50-50 games where you really have an edge. So to me, that's the game selection for beginners. Stay in the shallow end as long as you can, especially if you're somebody who's surrounding yourself with people and knowledge to make yourself better and give yourself an edge. Is there anything that you need to add to that? Or want to add to that?
I mean, I think you covered that really well. I mean, I would echo all that advice. I will say, I like to play the smaller field tournaments. It looks like DraftKings has some good single entry, lower stakes, 3 max stuff. That's maybe not super small field, but a little bit closer. I'm looking at the high 5 single entry, 7K people, somewhat flat in the top 10. I like the payout structures in the top 10 where the top 10 itself is a little bit flat. Like I almost don't even care about the min cash payout. It's just, if I have a really good team, let me get paid off whether I finish first or sixth, that's what I care about a little bit more. And I will say MME is a little bit more appealing for me in NBA than NFL, because I really think you can beat people on just smart exposures, because the correlation matters a little bit less and there's a little bit less variance. If you just constantly have more exposure to the right players in the field, you're going to hit on some of those combinations over time, and you can kind of churn out a little bit of a more consistent ROI with those strong exposures. Whereas NFL sometimes can be a bit more, did I run into the nuts and bank on my stack? And it's a little bit more variant in MME.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll give him one little bonus thing, kind of what you talked about before. You were saying how like baseball, there's a home run, football, there's like a 50-yard touchdown. There's these events, these single events that totally changed the prospects of your team, your allocations across 150 lineups or mass multi-entry, or changes the look of the entire tournament. This ain't rock and jock. There's no 25-point shot in daily fantasy NBA. So it's more of a volume sport. So if you are playing those games, especially at the low stakes age or low stakes, your edge is knowing where that volume is coming from. So again, stay to those games as long as you can, express your edge as long as you can, and then you graduate hopefully with a larger bankroll later than earlier. So Mike, thank you for being here. I appreciate you doing this video for us. Guys, go follow Mike on Twitter. I'll put a link down below in the description. Go check out the stuff over at ETR. There's a pinned comment down below. Click the link and go over there and check out their stuff, and look out for another video right over my face.
He's a legend.